Hey everybody, thank you for checking in and welcome to another one. And today we're talking about cloned lenses. Many great lenses were produced in the mid-years of the 20th century, from let's say the 1930s to the 1980s, and many of those lenses have achieved really iconic, real cult status. I'm talking about lenses like the Zeiss Sonnar 50mm f2, for example, or the 85mm f2, the Zeiss Biotar 58mm f2, or the 75 f1.5. That's a really exotic lens. Or, for example, the Meyer Optic 100mm f2.8. So these are really all classic lenses that have come about during that time. All of these lenses have unique visual signatures, and they often cost many thousands of pounds or dollars for a good one. But many of them were copied and brought to the mass market, and they make images with identical visual signatures for a lot less money. You can find many of them, in fact, for £50 or less. So let's have a look at a few of them. The first one I mentioned, the Zeiss Sonnar 50mm f2, a very, very famous, very, very iconic lens. However, there is a Soviet copy from the former Soviet days, and that's this one. That's the Jupiter 8 50mm f2, and this thing was made, I don't know, in the millions. There are millions and millions and millions of these little lenses. It's a beautiful little lens. It's a rangefinder lens. This one has an M39 mount. This is from one of the Zorki rangefinders, and this one in fact came with a Zorki 4K that I bought. I've liked this lens really for many, many years. From the first moment I shot it, I liked it. It's a beautiful little optic. Considering it's a pre-war lens, it's pretty sharp. I mean, this one was made in the 70s. This isn't from pre-war times, but it's an exact copy of the Sonnar 50mm. So, as I say, it's pretty sharp. It makes very, very nice background blur. It's an f2 lens. It's a 50mm standard lens, and it will shoot on any mirrorless camera, of course, like all of these lenses will today. So this is a great way of getting that Sonnar look and not paying very much for it. You can find one of these lenses certainly for £60 at the very upper end of things. You can often find one for about £40. You can buy one on a broken Zorki camera for maybe £20 to £40. It's multi-coated, unlike the original, so flare is a bit better controlled. I mean, it's not brilliant, but it will resist some direct sunlight. If you're careful how you angle your lens, it will drop pretty easily. If you use a hood, it's better, but it does have, it's nice to know it does have those coatings on there for protection. A similar lens is the older brother or sister or sibling to the 50mm f2, and that's the Zeiss Sonnar 85mm f2, which is reborn in the form of the KMZ Jupiter 9. Now this is a beautiful old lens. It's great for portraits, and probably many people use it for that. I would guess many people just use it only for portraits, but it's a good general photography lens as well. It's not so long that it can't be used as a general lens. This is a low contrast lens. It makes fairly low contrast images, much like the smaller Jupiter 8. This one makes fairly low contrast images, and they are beautiful low contrast images. It works particularly well for black and white, and when I shot some black and white footage with it, it reminded me of nothing more than an old David Lean film. And I know he did used to use Zeiss lenses on his cinema productions, so if you want a flavour of 30s movies, this one will give it to you. A very, very nice old optic the Jupiter 9, available for around about 100 to 150 pounds. Again, far cheaper than the Zeiss Sonnar original, if you can even find one, which, you know, you may well not be able to find one in working order so easily. So for top end 150 pounds, you're up and running with the old Zeiss Sonnar look, and it's a very beautiful look indeed. Where can we go next? Well, there are the Zeiss Biotar clones, and there are quite a lot of these clones. The best known one is, of course, this one, the Helios 44. This is a lovely little lens. It's 58mm f2. And the Biotars and their clones are famous for swirling. If you want a bit of cheap swirl, this is the cheapest way to get it. The Helios 44 is the cheapest way to get it. This is a great lens for general photography, and it's also, because of what it can do with its swirly background blur, it's also a great lens for portraits as well. You might consider it a little short for portraits, but you know, it's 58, 60mm. I reckon that's fine for a portrait, and this lens will make you a nice one, and it will give you some magic in the background with what it can do with its blur. But it's not the most blurry of the Biotar type lenses, because as well as a Biotar 58mm, there also was a Biotar 75mm, and you can buy clones of that lens. The most well-known one, the best, just adjust my mic, the best known one is probably the Helios 40, and that is a KMZ lens, a former Soviet lens. That was made from about 1960, and I think it is still made in small quantities. It's been sort of made on and off since 1960 or thereabouts. And you can buy one of those lenses for around about £300 and get the authentic long Biotar experience. That's a mad lens, the Helios 40. It's the king of the swirlers. There is no better lens for making swirl. It's a little bit longer, it's 10mm longer than the Biotar that it's based on. The original long Biotar was a 75mm and the Helios 40 is an 85mm, so it makes even more background blur, background swirl than the original does. There are 75mm copies of the 75mm Biotar. There is a very recent one from TT Artisan, but I believe there was one made by Oprema. I'm not too sure if that got off the ground. They may have made some, but I've not been able to find copies of the Oprema lens for sale. I know it was on a Kickstarter about 2017. Meyer Optic also make, because the Meyer Optic company is now reborn and revivified and it's making lenses again, they also make a copy of the Biotar 75mm f1.5. That is around about 4 or 5 times the price of either the Helios 40, that costs about £300, or the TT Artisan copy, that costs about £250. But the Meyer version is available. It might be a little better made and put together than the Helios 40 version. In fact, it probably is. The Helios 40 is well made, but the tolerances are not that fine, so you get things like a little bit of slack and slop on the aperture rings. It's a very nice lens, it's very well made, but it does have a little bit of extra play where the TT Artisan version doesn't, and I don't suppose the Meyer Optic version does either. So it's possible to get Biotar copies really pretty cheaply, from about £50 for the 58mm Helios 44, £300 around about for the 85mm Helios 40, about £250 for the 75mm TT Artisan, and I think it's around about £1,000 to £1,500 for the Meyer Optic 75mm f1.5 Biotar copy. So lots to choose from there. The Maya Trio Plan 100mm f2.8 is a very sought after lens. Copies of those lenses in good working order go for quite a bit of money. I can't remember exactly what it is, but I'll put it on screen. They're pretty expensive, but you can get a much, much cheaper version. This is a famous lens. It's famous for its soap bubble bokeh. It gives lots of little tiny bubbles in the background from point light sources. It's a very, very beautiful effect. The original lens is pretty expensive. The original Maya version is pretty expensive, but you can buy a copy from TTR to Zan for around about, I think it's about 150 to 200 pounds. You can also buy a copy from the revived Maya optic company, and those are around about, I think around about £1,000, but again I'll put it on screen, can't remember exactly. It's a beautiful, beautiful lens, a simple manual focus lens, not a very complex optical construction. From memory I think it's about 3 or 4 elements, but I'll put that on screen as well. But it does make the most astonishing bubbles in the background of a shot, and it gives you the most astonishing background blur. So it's a very, very entertaining portrait lens, and just a really lovely lens to shoot for general photography as well. I think 100mm is fine for general photography. I've often taken out and used 100mm lenses when I go out shooting, and I find that they give me that little bit of reach that a 50 doesn't, so I appreciate them for that. I do like a little bit of reach in my photography. Now here's a beautiful little lens which you will recognise if you've ever shot any of the early rangefinders from Leica, the Barnack Leicas or the Zorki or Fed copies. This is a little collapsible 50mm f3.5 lens, and the original of course was the Leica Elmar 50mm f3.5. This is a copy by Fed. This is a 1936 copy by Fed. I use the word copy cautiously and advisedly, and I will come to talk about that in a moment, whether these are really copies of the Elmar or not. But they really do look identical. As I say, this is an early Fed copy. This is an uncoated version of the Fed 10. You can also get a coated version of this lens, and that lens makes really, really nice colours. It's great for colours. This pre-war one, this is an uncoated one, and it's great for black and white shots. It gives you an image that really looks like an early 1930s film shot on black and white film. It was made for black and white. Pretty much all of the film available was black and white at that time, and that's where it works best. But if you want to shoot colour, this makes reasonable colour shots, but the coated lens is really better for colour shots, and there's a coated Fed 10 as well. There are also Industar versions, the Industar 22. I've shot that lens a lot, and it's a very beautiful lens, makes very, very beautiful images. And there's also the Industar 50 collapsible. So, right, are these copies of the Leica Elmar or not? Well, there is debate about this, and there is some controversy about this. Many people say flatly, no, they are not copies. And okay, that might be true. However, I've looked at them side by side. I was surprised to find the Elmar, I expected it to be an exact word for word, millimetre for millimetre, dimension for dimension copy of the Fed here. I expected it to accord out rather exactly. I thought the Fed would be an exact copy of the Elmar, but it's not. The Elmar's taller than the Fed. It's actually a little bit longer. It's nearer in length to the Industar 22 and 50, which again are a little bit longer than the Fed, maybe 5mm or so. Now, the Fed design of lens, this one here, and the later Industar 22 and 50 are Tessar design lenses. There is no doubt about that. The Elmar isn't quite a Tessar design in that the aperture blades are moved to a slightly different position than you would usually find in a Tessar lens. But as I understand it, the optical formula, that is the number of lens elements and their arrangements, are pretty much the same as you'd find in a Tessar. Now, I have read, this may be apocryphal, it may be wrong, but I have read that when that Leica lens was being designed, the designers didn't want to make a Tessar copy, an exact Tessar copy, so they moved the aperture mechanism just a little within the barrel of the lens so that they could then claim it wasn't an exact Tessar copy. I don't know if that's true or not, but what I've read leads me to think that the Elmar, even though it is different in dimensions to the Fed, the Elmar is a Tessar lens. So in that sense, the Fed, the Industar 22 and 50 are copies of the Elmar lens, or at least they are very, very similar lenses to the Elmar lens, and certainly the appearance is the same. So in that sense, they are pretty much copies. And whatever the case with this Elmar or Tessar business, whatever the case, the copies are as well made as the Elmar. They look as good as the Elmar, and they shoot as well as the Elmar. In fact, you could argue that they shoot better than the Elmar. Many people have made that case. I don't know. The only Elmar I've shot was a little bit scratched up and damaged, so I can't do a fair comparison. But many people have said a coated Elmar in good condition and a coated Industar 22 in good condition, the Industar actually shoots better than the Elmar. People have said that, so I don't know. However, these are all great lenses. They all look exactly like an Elmar. No one's going to come up and measure it. So this is a great way to get an Elmar clone, in my opinion. So I think I've covered most of the cloned lenses that are commonly available, but if you know of any clones of iconic lenses that I've missed that are readily available, please do let me know. Pop it down there in the comments box, I'd like to know. Coming up on the show, we've got, not today, but future episodes, we've got the Nikon 105mm f 2.5. Yes, I've finally managed to get a copy of this most iconic lens, the lens that shot the photograph of the Afghan girl. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's in the post at the moment and it's winging its way towards me with all haste, and I can't wait to get hold of it and start shooting it. A really, really iconic lens, one of the great lenses of the 20th century film photography days. I've also got a truly horrible 50mm lens that really should have been much better. I was astonished to find out how bad this lens was. That's coming up in a future episode. Many, many thanks to everybody who watched this video to the end. I really do appreciate that. Many, many thanks to subscribers and many, many thanks to patrons, and many, many thanks to everybody else as well. I do hope you've enjoyed this show. I do hope it's been informative. If you like what we're doing on this channel and you'd like to become a patron, you can support us over at Patreon. What is it now? www.patreon.com/Zenography, and you can do that from $1 per month. That would be appreciated. If you've enjoyed the episode, chuck us a sub. That too would be appreciated. As for me, that is it for now. So if you're not doing anything too difficult, irksome or bothersome next week at around this time, please do join me for a spot more Zenography. Cheerio all.